Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller. Dr. Hackenmiller is an OBGYN and integrative medicine physician in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She's also the medical director of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy and the author of 2 books, A Friend Like John, Understanding Autism, and The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing. Welcome, Dr. Hackenmiller.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, Suzanne, how did you get interested in this term that people call forest bathing? What was it about that drew you to that subject?
Right. Well, it's a very long story, so I'll try to abbreviate. But it's one of those things that I took a major tangent from conventional OBGYN back in about 2010 when I started exploring integrative medicine. I then did a fellowship in integrative medicine and then was trying to really find my niche in what aspect of integrative medicine it would be. It really found me, as it were. I studied herbal medicine just out of curiosity, so I did another couple of years of herbal medicine study. And I was one of those people who back in 2010 was very burned out from conventional medicine. And I had some life circumstances also that occurred. I have a son who has autism, hence the book that you mentioned. I also had a husband who was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer back in 2008. And so both of my family members, I have a daughter too, who by the way is typically developing and all that. But along my personal journey, I had people constantly talking to me about conventional and alternative approaches for dealing with my family members' conditions. And so that was one of the things that led me towards integrative medicine. And as I mentioned, I was very burned out back in the late 2000s and started taking part in these workshops called The Healer Within, which were about dealing with physician burnout. To make a long story short, I spent a lot of time bemoaning the fact that I had to be stuck indoors seeing patients. It really bothered me to be stuck in the confines of 4 sterile walls all of the time. It was part of the process of The Healer Within, which we can go into if we have more time later, that helped me to discover that I really needed to be outdoors, and a very specific experience helped me to discover a way that I could marry both of my hats. The conventional medical doctor, then subsequently the integrative medical doctor, but also this part of me that needed to be outdoors. So again, to make a long story short, after my husband passed away in 2012, I spent my time outdoors just trying to cope, really. It was part of my grieving process to get outdoors in nature, and I found myself running initially, and I had never been a runner before, but I started running and training to run large events and things like that, longer and longer events, and spent more and more time trail running, discovered that trail running was a thing. You could run in nature. I started mountain biking. I started training to do what are called adventure triathlons that were trail running, mountain biking, and kayaking. So just spent more and more time outdoors in adventure types of things in my own healing after my husband's death. So then in about 2014, just happening to read an Oprah magazine, I saw an article about forest bathing, and it just instantly connected with me. I'd never heard of such a thing. And it talked about the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy and Amos Clifford, who founded the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy in the United States. And I was instantly intrigued. And so I ripped that piece of that page out of the Oprah magazine and kept it for couple of years, just thinking that at some point I needed to investigate further. So that's kind of the very abbreviated version of how all of this happened.
Now, the founder of the Natural Healing Show, Yara Groetti, she lives in England, and she does tremendous, fabulous work with woodlands and teaching people survival skills and working on conservation of the woodland forests in England. And also travels all over the world to actually experience the forests everywhere. So Yara Groetti, the founder of the Natural Healing Show, is a big fan of forest bathing. So can you explain for our audience what exactly is forest bathing?
I definitely can. So forest bathing is adapted from the practice called Shinden yoku out of Japan that was started in the early 1980s. It's not as ancient as people would imagine possibly, but a couple of doctors in Japan, Dr. Lee and Dr. Miyazaki, discovered, they were looking at their patients in Tokyo, in Japan, and finding, as we know now, that the levels of stress and mental health issues in Japan are astronomical, and the suicide rates are some of the highest in the world. And so they wondered if they could get people out of the city and out into nature, if that would have a positive impact on their health. So they started taking people outside of the city, an hour outside of Tokyo, on trains to a forest that was designated as a forest therapy forest. And they would take people out there, and sometimes for 2 and 3 day forest bathing experiences, where they would simply guide them to take nature in through the various senses and just get away from the chaos and the overstimulation of the city and their jobs and their lives. And they found that it did have very positive effects on both their physical health and their mental health. And they took a number of samples and a number of readings on these people to see what was really happening. And so over the last several decades now, they've been collecting samples of saliva from these participants before and after, and looking at their salivary cortisol levels and their salivary amylase levels, and these are biomarkers of stress essentially. They would check their blood pressure and their pulse and sometimes their heart rate variability before and after going out into the woods on these forest bathing excursions, and they found that all of these things did seem to improve. They also did questionnaires on their mental health and looked at things like depression and anxiety and self-esteem and vigor and all of these kinds of things before and after, and found statistically significant differences before and after these forest bathing experiences. And then they studied natural killer cells, which are another exciting development, which we can talk about more in a minute if you'd like. But so that's where it started in Japan. In the about really 10 years or so ago, Amos Clifford, who I mentioned earlier, started practicing this here in the United States. And he's in California near Santa Rosa, and started taking people out in similar types of walks. And he created what he calls a standard sequence, which is designed to take people deeper and deeper into their subconscious state, really, and out of their crazy monkey mind state, as we call it. And so he sort of developed a practice in a specific way that he now uses with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. He then started training guides to lead this practice here and now all over the world. And we have, I don't know, some 500 or so certified guides around the world now. He's in, I believe, his 42nd cohort of people trained now to do this, to guide this practice. So that's kind of where it started, the history of it. As far as what it is, it's not a hike, so it's not a hike for physical activity or for exercise. It's not a nature identification walk, so we're not going out to try to learn all about the plants and the animals and the birds and the trees and things. It's a mindful way to take nature in. And again, it's often guided so that you can take nature in through the various senses in a way that maybe you have never experienced before.
Now, that's just a beautiful story. And, you know, Yara Gruetti, the founder of the Natural Healing Show, she and I have spoken many times because she lives in London. And she has to go out to experience the forest of England, whereas I literally live in the center of Atlanta. And first of all, my house is surrounded by trees. There's acres of trees facing my healing room. So if you see my website, CatherineCarrigan.com, there's lots of photographs of the forest. And so when I'm working with clients, they're literally looking at my organic garden and then the forest beyond. And then I'm 5 minutes from a park where I walk my dog every day.
Yeah.
There's a creek, there's trees, there's flowers every season. And you know, it's just literally you get all 5 elements in Chinese medicine.
Wonderful.
You know, the earth, the air, you know, the trees, the water, it's all there. Now, for our audience, can you explain what is the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, and what is the specific protocol that your colleague has developed to lead people into forest bathing?
Right. Well, so again, Amos Clifford is the founder. The Association of Nature and Forest Therapy has a website, and it's just natureandforesttherapy.org. And so people can go to that website and learn more about the practice. There's a page of research about studies related to the health benefits of time spent in nature and, you know, in general, and then time spent forest bathing in more specific. At that website, there are blogs, so you can read all about people's various experiences. And then there's a link where you can find an interactive map where people can locate a guide anywhere all over the world. And so a certified guide from our organization. So, and there was a second part of your question. What was that?
So what is the specific protocol that is developed?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, he calls it the standard sequence. And so that means that guides who are trained in this specific program do this process the same way every single time. So if you go on a walk by an ANFT certified guide, you're going to find that it follows this standard sequence. So by standard sequence, I mean that we always start, well, first of all, I should back up and explain that in forest bathing, we use a sequence of invitations. So invitations are just that. It's an invitation to try what we suggest to, again, take your surroundings in a specific way related to the senses. Obviously, nothing is ever required, and we don't want people to do something that they're not comfortable with. However, in forest bathing, we always tell our participants that we're hoping that they reach the edge of their comfort zone. And there's something that happens to us when we do push the edge of our comfort zone. And I often will say that we should do something each day that scares us. And I really think that that's part of the process of just kind of pushing your comfort zone a little bit. And for every single participant, that is different. For some people, it might simply be standing with their eyes closed. For some people, it might be touching a tree. For some people, it might be who knows what, sharing amongst the participants. So the process involves a series of invitations, and then after each invitation, we come together in a circle, usually, in what we refer to as council. And at that time, participants are encouraged to share something of what they noticed during the previous invitation. And it could be something as simple as, I noticed the light sparkling off of a spider web, or something like that. Or it might be a really profound experience or discovery or reflection that they had during the previous invitation. And of course, people are given the option to not share. However, one of the things that Amos teaches is that sharing in counsel is really an integral part of the experience, and it's almost like a dream. If you have a dream at night and you wake up and you write it down, or you share it with someone else, you're more likely to remember it than if you just hop up and go about your day. And so it's thought that when we're kind of in this liminal state, as we call it, this kind of subconscious place, that if we don't share that or somehow solidify it into memory, we may not remember the experience. We may not have the growth or the physical change or the emotional or mental, spiritual change that often occurs during forest bathing. So back to kind of the standard sequence then. So we start by the first invitation, which is called the pleasures of presence. And I just love the name of that. I think that's so beautiful and eloquent. But the pleasures of presence just is where you're guided to start taking things in one by one through the various senses. And it's almost a guided meditation or a guided imagery to just start noticing your surroundings. And people often have fairly major realizations or noticings during this, where they'll say, gosh, I never have noticed the sounds in that way, or I've never noticed the way the air feels on my skin in that way, or I've never felt so deeply grounded or rooted or sharing community with these trees and animals or things. And so right away that takes people right down into that kind of liminal space. So that's the first invitation. Then we typically do something called what's in motion. And we'll either be walking or sitting still or standing still, simply noticing visually what's in motion around us. And often going into that invitation, people will think, I don't know, nothing's in motion or everything's in motion and this is silly. But this is one of those invitations that often people have a really profound experience with. And so we'll ask afterwards what they noticed in counsel, and then we go on to typically a series of invitations, and it can be one other invitation, it can be 10 depending on length of time, and then we typically end each forest bathing experience with a tea ceremony. And so tea ceremony involves typically foraging for a plant if where we're located is a place that foraging is allowed and is safe. And that's part of what we learn in guide training is how to safely choose a plant to make tea out of. And we'll sit around, we'll gather around and literally partake in this tea. And by doing so, we're exploring that sense of taste, and then also being able to, we talk about throughout forest bathing, taking the forest or the desert, and again, this can be done, by the way, anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a forest, but taking in the surroundings into the body. So we're taking the sounds in, we're taking the physical, tactile sensations in, we're taking the smells in, the visual experience, and so by finally the last invitation, taking the tea in, we're bringing it physically into the body.
Now,
so that's it.
That's it. Okay, so I see from your website, the organization's website, natureandforesttherapy.org, that a training program is about $3,400, not including lodging and meals.
Right.
So if our listeners want to engage in a forest bathing experience with one of your certified guides, does it cost the participants money?
Well, typically, most guides do either charge a small amount for their walks, or sometimes it's a donation, or sometimes it's a donation to the park or the trail system and things like that. Typically, I think most guides are asking about maybe $20 for a couple hour, 2 to 2.5 hour experience. So becoming a forest therapy guide is not necessarily lucrative business, but it's out of a love and a passion for this work. So yeah, the guide training is not inexpensive. You mentioned lodging and meals are not included. When I did my training, we camped in a tent for the week. And it was rainy and cold for the entire week, but it certainly helped to make for the full experience. There are also some scholarships available for people who want to do the guide training and don't have the means. That is absolutely a part of the process, that those things exist. So if you're listening and thinking you'd love to become a guide, but that sounds prohibitive, there are ways to make it happen.
And if anyone in our audience would like to find a guide in their area, again, if you go to natureandforesttherapy.org, and then once they get to your website, natureandforesttherapy.org, where would they find their guide in their area?
Well, I'm not looking at the website at the moment, but I believe it's under community. And then if you click on that, are you looking at it right now? I believe that you click community and then it says find a guide.
Okay, so it's, for what is forest therapy, and then experience forest therapy, and that would be where people can find.
Great, thank you.
Right. So now, Dr. Hackenmiller, what's the difference between, and you did a great job of explaining the protocol that you all recommend in your Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. How can people everywhere take some of these elements into regular walks in the woods? Because our audience is all over the world, and they may have a city park like I do, that's I can walk in my park for well over an hour, or they may live near a wilderness area. How can people integrate these activities into their own nature walks?
That's a great question. And again, I think it's ideal if a person can to experience a walk with a guide at least one time, and then from that they can just blossom and do all kinds of things. But absolutely, this is not something that is rocket science. We can do this any given moment. And I would like to emphasize that forest bathing can be done with the tiniest amount of nature. And so we also have guides who have trained from all over the world, some of whom live in cities. Part of our training involves a practice called sit spot. So this is something that anyone can do on any given day, and it's a really great practice. For our 6-month practicum, following our week of training, we were required to at least 2 times per week do a sit spot. And so sit spot is when you go out, ideally to the same place each time, and sit for 20 minutes outdoors in nature, no cell phone, no distractions, and simply sit for 20 minutes. And it is believed and seems to be true that something happens at around that 20-minute mark, where the beings of the more than human world, as we call them, seem to get used to our sitting there and just don't care anymore. We're no longer seen as a threat. And so you do start to see things kind of happen and shift as you just sit there quietly. And so sit spot has no agenda. You're not supposed to be, meditating or striking a yoga pose or praying or chanting or journaling or doing anything other than simply sitting and noticing for 20 minutes outdoors. I know people who live in the city who have a potted plant on their balcony, and that is their sit spot. I know people who live in an area where they don't have a lot of nearby nature, but they may have a view of water or the mountains or something like that, a vista that they can gaze at, and that works. I have guided a number of forest bathing walks now at conferences for medical professionals and other types of conferences, where one time I guided in a courtyard of a resort in San Diego, where we had, I guess I don't know the square footage, but a small courtyard with one palm tree, a number of tropical plants around, and one evergreen tree. And we had about 27 physicians and other healthcare providers in this tiny courtyard for 2.5 hours. And we had an outstanding experience. People absolutely were able to get exactly what we need. I guided one time at a conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where we had about 75 people. We were able to break into 4 or 5 different groups, but we were on a lawn at a resort. But in this instance, we had a view of the Grand Tetons that we could gaze out on, and absolutely it works. So I encourage people to just imagine and use their creativity in ways that they could do this with whatever they have. So one tree, you can do it.
I know my healing room, if you've seen my website, CatherineCarrigan.com, is full of orchids. And when people come in, one of the first things they do is they usually, and I don't prompt them, they just do it. They spend time just admiring my orchids and noticing all the changes and taking photographs of them and noticing this one's about to bloom. And, by doing that, it definitely begins to shift their whole consciousness.
Yes, absolutely.
Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller, author of The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing, we know that there's something called phytoncides.
Right.
Phytoncides. What exactly are those, and how can our audience take advantage of those?
Yeah, isn't that a fascinating concept? So phytoncides, if you just look at the word, phyton means plant, side means to kill. So that sounds like a really violent type of thing, but these are chemicals that plants have that are used by the plant to kill off invasive types of things. So phytoncides have been found to be antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, and they're an actual chemical constituent that's part of the essential oil of a plant, and they're most abundant in evergreen plants. But we know that as we're out and among plants, that we're taking advantage, we're benefiting from these phytoncides as we just inhale the aroma of and the air that we're exchanging with plants. And so it has been found, and this is some of the research out of Japan, that these chemicals have effects in humans similar to their effects in plants, where they help us with their antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory effects. Yeah. And then, I failed to mention the anti-cancer, anti-tumor effects of the phytoncides, which is just absolutely exciting. It's been found that these phytoncides increase our body's natural killer, or NK cell, both number and activity. And so we know that as human beings, as we're walking around and living every single day, we're creating cells where our cells are replicating and dividing. And every single day, some of those cells turn out not to be healthy, normal cells. So our body has this defense, has many defenses, but one of them is the production of natural killer cells, or NK cells. And these cells' job is to sweep through the body, find the abnormal cells, gobble them up, literally, and then excrete them out of the body. So we really need these natural killer cells. And we also know that things in our environment can impair our natural killer cells' ability to do their job. So toxins in our environment, alcohol, tobacco, fried food, even stress, all of these things can impair our body's natural NK ability to do their job. And so by just being out in nature, it's been found that the phytoncides help our natural killer cells to be more abundant in number and activity after just spending time in nature.
Now, let's talk about the concept of dosage. In other words, how much or how long. So if you go to a physician such as yourself, a medical doctor, the doctor will say, you need, this many milligrams of this prescription drug. Right. If you come to me as a natural healer, I'll sit there with all your supplements and say, one of these, none of that, take it in the morning, and this one doesn't agree with your body, you're not digesting it. So, one of the things we know is the concept of biochemical individuality. But overall, what does the research show? How long does someone need to, how much time does someone need to spend in nature for these biochemical shifts to start to occur?
Right. Well, and this is something that is yet to be totally understood and researched, and it's the subject of all kinds of future research. And isn't it funny that we have to quantify it? First of all, let me comment on that. Isn't it funny that people need a dosage and need a frequency recommendation, and it's as if we can't get out of that concept of conventional medicine where everything has to have a scientifically studied dosage. So I just, on one hand, think that's really funny. And then on the other hand, my conventional medical doctor hat says, yes, we must know the exact dosage and frequency and all of that. And so, so that's just funny to me. But yet I do think, especially in this era where we're more used to conventional medicine than we are some of these integrative approaches, people do need research. And so that's something that ANFT is working to do, is to partner with people who are doing this type of research so that we can have answers for the people who are skeptical and need actual numbers and dosages. So we do know that a couple of hours, there was a recent study that showed a couple of hours even has health benefits. One of the interesting studies that was done by Dr. Lee in Japan looked at a 3-day, 2-night forest bathing experience. And that's more than we typically do. So my walks are typically either 2.5 hours or sometimes a full day, 8 hours or so experience. My training, we essentially forest bathed for a whole week, but most people don't typically do that, although I think there are going to be more and more opportunities for people to take advantage of longer types of workshops or retreats. Anyway, back to Dr. Lee's research, he found that after a 3-day, 2-night forest bathing experience, they checked the level of these NK cells, and they found that immediately upon return that they were statistically significantly elevated in both number and activity. So not only just how many they had, but how active they were against tumors. So they were really excited to find that they were markedly elevated immediately upon returning. And there's a really great visual graph of this in Dr. Lee's book, Forest Bathing. And so they found immediately that they were elevated and more active, and then they continued following the levels. And they found that even 7 days out after this 3-day, 2-night forest bathing experience, that they remained elevated. And they continued following them and found that they were still statistically significantly higher in both number and activity 30 days out. Isn't that unbelievable?
Well, I know, many of our audience may say, gosh, I can't schedule a 3-day forest retreat at the moment, but like myself, generally when I walk my dog, I'll walk for 30 minutes, sometimes for an hour, right? So, and our guest, Yara Groetti, the founder of the Natural Healing Show, she said that the research shows that even if you're spending as little as 20 minutes in nature, it starts to change your whole body chemistry.
By all means, absolutely.
And what is your experience with your clients? Like how little time, in the busyness of life, how, what's the minimum amount of time that someone needs to spend in nature to start experiencing some of these beneficial changes?
Right. Well, I think that 20-minute sit spot is the perfect example of that 20-minute shift. And so I think if a person is able to do that even once or twice a week, that's a start. If you can pull that off once a day, that's ideal. But say you can't even do that. Say you have a 15-minute break from work or a 10-minute opportunity to get outdoors. We know from the studies of meditation and mindfulness and various other mind-body practices that as little as 8 to 12 minutes in some studies have been found on functional MRI imaging to change the brain. So I think we can almost extrapolate from some of that what if 8 to 12 minutes, roughly 10 minutes, could have some shift. And in my personal experience, I have seen that. If I can get outdoors on a break from work for even 10 minutes and just walk or sit and take in nature, it can have a very profound effect. You know, I've been very surprised in some of the conferences that I've guided walks in. Again, sometimes we'll have just a really short period of time and a huge number of people. You know, ideally a forest bathing walk would have maybe 8 to 10 participants. Like I said, I've had 27 to 75 people in as little as 30 minutes. And you would think that would be a disaster. You would just think that wouldn't work. And yet I'm constantly shocked to realize that people can have a very profound and healing experience in a large group of people in a relatively short period of time. So it's all about the way it's guided, I think, and in a way that can really help people quickly get from busy, crazy, everyday monkey mind to just a calmer, quieter state, and just being able to take it in that way.
I think personally that this is one of the many benefits for having a dog, because
Yes.
I know for myself, I don't have a fenced in yard, so I'm taking my dog out multiple times a day, and where I live and work is surrounded by beautiful Atlanta forest.
Yes.
Now, Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller, OBGYN, integrative medicine physician, author of 2 books. Can you share for our audience a little bit more about your book, The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing? What would you learn by reading that book?
I would love to. And I have to quickly say on the comment, the thought of the dog, you're absolutely right. Both, you know, dogs and children, they're so inquisitive. And if we just follow their lead, they're forest bathing naturally. We already know how to do this. Many of us have kind of forgotten it as we've gotten older and busier. A friend of mine and one of the leaders in the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, Nadine Mazzola, by the way, just published a book called Forest Bathing for Dogs, or with Dogs. So, and it's an adorable, beautiful book. So absolutely, forest bathing with dogs. Allow your dog to guide you. So my book, yes, thank you for asking, was just released July 1st of this year, 2019, by Falcon Guides. And it arose in a funny way. I was asked by Falcon Guides about a year ago if I would write a book about forest bathing. And I said, well, Amos Clifford just published the book of forest bathing, so this is not my book to write. And so the editor called and said, well, let's brainstorm. And so we did, and he asked what I did and how I came to be doing this and all. And I shared some of my story that I shared earlier about my life, my family, my survival through adventure, and then how I came to realize that it's very important, of course, to balance adventure with a more mindful practice, and just started kind of doing them together all of the time. And I found that I was forest bathing while I was on a bike, and I found that I was forest bathing as I ran, and found that you can forest bathe in a number of ways. And I shared with him that I had studied herbal medicine, and one of the things I love to do with people who come on walks with me is share the medicinal properties of the plants around us. And I find that people really resonate with that. There's this thirst for this ancient knowledge that people used to know how to treat themselves with plants in our midst and things. And so there just seems to be so much interest in the concept of herbal medicine and how we could use that as a tea ceremony, and there just seems to be interest. And I shared that I also talk with my patients about these studies of science and health, and that also seems to really be of interest to people. And people want to know what the research shows, and it confirms what they already inherently know, and that is helpful for people. So we brainstormed like this, and afterwards the editor said, well, I think that's the book. And I said, I think that is the book. So that was how it kind of came about. And I had another book that's in my head that I think I want to write, and it was not this. So it was really funny that this emerged, and it became The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing.
Now, we've talked about phytoncides, which are again emitted by the plants.
Right.
What about fresh air? What about negative ions?
Yeah.
What can you share for our audience about the healing benefits of negative ions from being outside in nature?
I love that topic. So there's this idea of grounding in nature, and that it benefits us when we come in contact with the soil or water, or if we're near a waterfall or even running water, that we're benefiting from the negatively charged ions that come from the ground or come from water. And it's really interesting. I love telling about this. It's easier if I had some visuals, but I'll try to do the best I can. Probably most people have heard about free radicals. And free radicals are produced when the stable molecules of our body are come into contact with either toxins, again, some of the things I mentioned a little bit ago, things like fried food, alcohol, tobacco, pesticides, herbicides, even stress. These kinds of insults to the body take our stable molecules and allow them to lose an electron. So if you can imagine a circle with orbiting electrons, thinking back to chemistry 101, these stable molecules lose an electron because of these toxins or these insults coming at us. And so you hear a lot about antioxidants, which are things like vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, and beta carotene, lutein, lycopene, all of these things that we know come from fresh vegetables and fruits. And so then people, of course, supplement with some of these things if they don't think they're getting enough through their diet. So antioxidants, such as vitamin A, C, E, etc., are molecules that have extra electrons in their orbit. So swirling, lots of electrons or negatively charged particles. So if our free radicals, our unstable molecules, happen to come into contact with an antioxidant, like vitamin A, C, E, etc., they just bump into these antioxidants. The antioxidants are happy to give an extra electron back to the free radical. They stabilize our molecules and prevent them from deteriorating, degenerating. They prevent the aging process. They prevent the development of cancer and other medical problems. So this is why people talk about taking antioxidants in supplement form and eating fresh fruits and vegetables. Well, the happy, exciting news is, after all that technical sciencey junk, that simply spending time in nature acts as an antioxidant. So coming into contact with the ground or a tree or a stream or a waterfall, we're benefiting from all of those negatively charged particles, those electrons, which then can stabilize our free radicals that are caused by things like pesticides and all those toxins and things, can be restabilized, regenerated, and prevent not only the aging process, so yes, there's a fountain of youth, it's just being outdoors, and prevent the degeneration of tissues, prevent the formation of cancers. So
that may be why the scientific research shows that people who raise gardens, like myself, I have an organic garden, no pesticides, no herbicides. Gardeners tend to live longer and are happier.
Absolutely.
And what about vitamin D? I know, medical doctors such as yourself run lab tests. And, I have clients who come in and say, oh, I'm deficient in vitamin D.
Right.
Almost everybody's deficient in vitamin D, especially if you live in some place like England.
Right.
That the latitude or, anywhere in the UK where you're in a latitude on the planet where you're not getting enough sunlight a lot of the year. So how does being outdoors in forests help us to have more vitamin D in our bodies?
Yeah, well, vitamin D is so important, and I really, anybody who lives at a higher latitude than Florida is felt to be at risk of vitamin D deficiency. So that's most of the United States and most of Europe, and and everybody I check vitamin D levels on, if they're not supplementing, sadly, literally almost everybody is insufficient, if not deficient, in vitamin D. And we know now that vitamin D deficiency in childhood predisposes us to autoimmune conditions later in life, such as MS and a whole host of other autoimmune conditions. We know that vitamin D deficiency gives you a worse prognosis for cancer if you are diagnosed with cancer. We know that it's implicated in heart disease and just every condition, diabetes. I mean, we could go on and on about vitamin D deficiency. So I just saw something the other day that was talking about how the recommendation of sunscreen may have been one of the worst healthcare mistakes we've had. And of course, skin cancer is concerning, and sunbathing and lying in the sun for hours and hours is not recommended. But we do need to get some sun because vitamin D comes from the sun. So of course, being outdoors and getting some sun exposure is absolutely important for your health. It's recommended really that we try to get 15 minutes per day of exposed skin, as much skin as we can have exposed, ideally between the hours of 10 o'clock and 12, 10 and 12 in the morning when the sun is not as high, and just try to get some exposed skin, getting some vitamin D.
So Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller, OBGYN and integrative medicine physician, author of The Outdoor Adventurer's Guide to Forest Bathing. Any final thoughts for our audience?
Oh, it's been a pleasure to visit with your audience. I certainly appreciate having this opportunity and being able to chat with you all. Yeah, my prescription for you all today, because why not? There's no better time. Just get outside. Give yourself 10 minutes. I started a hashtag, by the way, called Outdoor Adventurer 365. If anybody would like to join me, it's just get outside 10 to 20 minutes a day. Snap a picture, post it on social media with that hashtag. Get outside daily, just a little bit. Try a sit spot.
Wonderful prescription. And you can find out more about Dr. Suzanne Bartlett Hackenmiller's wonderful work at integrativeinitiative.com and also natureandforesttherapy.org. You've been listening to The Natural Healing Show. This is your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. And remember, when you spend time in nature, you are engaging in natural healing. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.